The hum of servers fills the cramped Stanford dorm room, a mechanical heartbeat beneath fluorescent light. The year is 1997. Stacks of printer paper, streaked with half-formed algorithms, spill onto the floor. In the corner, an old beige monitor flickers. Lines of code scroll upward, relentless, hypnotic. Larry Page leans forward, eyes fixed on the terminal's glow. Sergey Brin paces behind him, muttering variables, probabilities, link structures. Then, a string of results populates the screen, cleaner, sharper, and far more relevant than anything they've ever seen. The program's name, still half a joke, blinks at the top. Backrub. Larry smirks, and Sergey almost offhandedly wonders aloud. What about calling it? Google? Outside, the campus sleeps. Inside, history begins to wake. From the sparks of invention to the battles that shaped the digital age, Tech Tales dives deep into the stories behind the world's most influential technology. These are the breakthroughs, the rivalries, the triumphs, and the spectacular failures that changed history. Told in rich detail, each episode takes you inside the moments where innovation met destiny. And the world was never the same. The internet of the mid-1990s was a paradox, boundless in potential, primitive in practice. In 1995, the World Wide Web had just crossed the threshold of 20,000 websites. By 1997, that number had exploded to over 1 million. It was a gold rush without a map, a vast expanse of digital territory where treasure and trash lay side by side. Search engines existed, yes, Alta Vista, Excite, Lycos, Yahoo's directory, but they were crude compasses at best. They sorted pages by counting how many times a word appeared, producing results cluttered with keyword stuff spam. Relevance was guesswork, and efficiency a dream. For users, it was often like wandering a library where every book had been dumped in a pile on the floor, with only a half-blind clerk to guide you. If you typed Jaguar, you might get a car dealership on page 1, a wildlife blog on page 7, and 100 meaningless link farms in between. The algorithms couldn't distinguish authority from noise. It was into this chaos that Stanford University's computer science department carved its own small pocket of order. In a low-slung building on the university's sprawling campus, professors lectured on artificial intelligence, computational linguistics, and the mathematics of networks. The hallways smelled faintly of solder and coffee. Graduate students like Larry Page wandered these corridors with a restless hunger, searching for ideas to anchor their doctoral research. Larry, born in 1973 in Michigan to computer science pioneers Carl and Gloria Page, was steeped in technology from childhood. His fascination wasn't with machines alone, but with systems, how to build frameworks that could make sense of complexity. Sergey Brin, 2 years younger, had arrived in the United States from Moscow as a 6-year-old refugee in 1979. He inherited his mathematician father's gift for patterns and his mother's problem-solving instinct, but carried it with an improvisational flair. When Larry and Sergey first crossed paths in 1995, it was during a campus tour. Legend has it they argued almost immediately. Spirited debates about the future of information retrieval, laced with both irritation and mutual intrigue. By 1996, Larry had begun sketching an idea that defied conventional thinking. Treat the web not as a flat set of pages, but as a dynamic graph of relationships. Each link from one page to another was not merely a connection. It was a vote of confidence. Some votes carried more weight, depending on who was casting them. The notion built on academic theories of citation analysis, but scaled them for a digital world. Larry's proposed crawler would map the web's link structure, calculating a ranking metric for every page. Sergey, intrigued, joined the project, bringing statistical expertise and relentless energy. Together, they worked in Stanford's server rooms, borrowing disk space wherever they could find it. Their earliest experiments involved processing a subset of the web, analyzing how links clustered, how authority could be mathematically distilled. It was messy, unglamorous work. Long nights in front of glowing CRT monitors, debugging code with coffee-stained printouts, fans whining as homemade servers strained under the load. The project earned a name in 1996, Backrub, a nod to its analysis of backlinks. It was a whimsical label, not intended for the ages. But as results improved, the nickname began appearing in emails around campus, and soon even professors were asking about it. The software was different, startlingly so. Search results came back clean, relevant, almost eerily prescient compared to the cluttered offerings of Yahoo or AltaVista. They had stumbled upon something rare, a technological advantage not easily replicated. But they weren't yet thinking about companies or IPOs. This was still a research project, one foot in academia, one in the chaotic, fast-evolving frontier of the commercial internet. It would take a catalytic event to push them out of the lab and into history. By early 1997, Backrub had outgrown the campus network. The crawler was mapping tens of millions of pages, consuming so much bandwidth that Stanford's IT department began to raise eyebrows. Larry and Sergey realized they would need more servers and more money if the project was to survive. They also knew they needed a name that reflected its ambition. One afternoon, Sean Anderson, a fellow graduate student, tossed out Googleplex, a mathematical term for 10 carat, 10 to the power of 100, essentially an unimaginably large number. Larry countered with Google. A quick domain search followed, and on September 15, 1997, Google.com was registered. Anderson had misspelled the term, but the mistake stuck, short, catchy, and destined for brand immortality. The transition from research to startup was cemented by a chance meeting with Andy Bechtolsheim, co-founder of Sun Microsystems. In August 1998, Bechtolsheim visited the Stanford campus to see a demo. The story has been told and retold. After just a few minutes of watching Google in action, he pulled out his checkbook and wrote a check for $100,000, made out to Google Incorporated. The problem? Google Incorporated didn't exist yet. Larry and Sergey scrambled to incorporate, officially founding the company on September 4, 1998. They set up shop in the garage of Susan Wojcicki, a friend and fellow Stanford alum, in Menlo Park. Rent was $1,700 a month. The space smelled faintly of motor oil and housed desks cobbled together from doors laid across sawhorses. A colorful Google logo, printed on an inkjet printer, hung over the workspace. In one corner, servers sat inside enclosures built from Lego bricks, a playful but functional solution to airflow management. Above it all, the hum of hard drives was constant, a mechanical reminder that the web never slept. The team was small but electric. Scott Hassan, often called the unofficial third founder, had written much of the early code. Craig Silverstein, a Stanford colleague, joined as Google's first official employee. Susan Wojcicki handled marketing and partnerships. Her sister and would later marry Sergey Brin. The culture was informal, caffeine-driven, and fiercely focused. Days bled into nights. Every scrap of user feedback was taken seriously. Every algorithm tweak was measured and debated. In August 1998, as Burning Man unfolded in Nevada's Black Rock Desert, Larry and Sergey attended. And, fearing investors might think they'd gone missing, placed a doodle of a stick figure behind the second O in the Google logo. This first Google Doodle would evolve into a tradition, marking holidays, anniversaries, and global events. By the end of 1998, Google was answering 10,000 queries a day. Word spread almost entirely through recommendation. People were astonished by its accuracy, the speed of its results, and the uncluttered white homepage. Compared to the noisy, ad-laden portals of competitors, Google felt like a breath of fresh air, an engine built not to trap users, but to send them swiftly on their way. Larry and Sergey knew they had a technology that could change the world. The question now was, could they scale it before someone else caught up? The garage could only hold them for so long. By early 1999, the walls of Susan Wojcicki's Menlo Park home were lined with towers of servers, each one built on scavenged parts, each whirring with the weight of millions of queries. A tangle of Ethernet cables sprawled like vines across the floor. Sergey would sometimes duck under them with a grin, as if navigating a jungle. Larry, meanwhile, paced between machines with a kind of quiet urgency. Growth was no longer hypothetical. It was happening, and fast. In June 1999, Sequoia Capital and Kleiner Perkins Caulfield and Byers, two of Silicon Valley's most powerful venture capital firms, each invested $12.5 million in Google. This was not charity. It was a bet on the future. The influx of $25 million meant more servers, more staff, and the ability to move into real office space on Charleston Road in Palo Alto. No longer confined to a garage, the team took over a modest building and immediately filled it with the same mix of technical rigor and playful chaos that had defined their early days. Google's culture, even then, was an oddity in the corporate world. Engineers roamed barefoot. Whiteboards were everywhere, covered in equations, flowcharts, and half-baked product ideas. The company fed its growing staff for free, a perk that became a legend in itself. And then there was the famous hiring mantra: we don't hire for skills alone. We hire for smart, creative people who can learn anything. But beneath the casual exterior was an intense competitive drive. Search engines like AltaVista, Lycos, and Yahoo still dominated market share. To win, Google had to be faster, cleaner, and more accurate than anyone else, and it had to scale without breaking. Larry and Sergey pushed their engineers to shave milliseconds off load times, to refine PageRank's ability to judge relevance, and to resist cluttering the homepage with anything unnecessary. Competitors flaunted portals stuffed with weather widgets, stock tickers, and chat rooms. Google doubled down on a single search box. The real breakthrough came in October 2000 when Google introduced AdWords. At first glance, it looked like a simple advertising tool, text-based ads displayed alongside search results. But it was revolutionary in execution. Ads were matched to queries, ensuring relevance. Advertisers paid only when users clicked. This pay-per-click model transformed search from a free service into a precision money machine. In its first year, AdWords attracted over 350 advertisers, small compared to later numbers, but a signal of what was coming. Meanwhile, Google began rolling out new products and services at a steady clip. In 2001, Google Images launched, offering access to 250 million indexed images, a staggering number at the time. Later that year, Google News debuted, aggregating headlines from thousands of sources and automatically grouping related stories. In 2002, the Google toolbar put search into browsers directly, bypassing the need to visit the homepage. The company also underwent a major leadership shift. In 2001, at the insistence of investors, Eric Schmidt was brought in as CEO, forming what came to be known as the Triumvirate: Schmidt managing operations, Larry and Sergey steering technology and product. Schmidt's arrival brought structure to Google's wild growth. He handled investors and operational planning, freeing Larry and Sergey to keep their focus on the long-term vision. Perhaps the most daring move came in April 2004, when Google launched Gmail. On April Fool's Day, no less. People assumed it was a prank: 1 gigabyte of free storage. More than 100 times what competitors like Yahoo Mail or Hotmail offered, with a sleek interface and lightning-fast search built in. But it was real, and it redefined user expectations overnight. Email was no longer about purging your inbox to save space. It was about archiving and finding anything instantly. By the summer of 2004, Google's momentum was undeniable. The company filed for an IPO, choosing an unusual Dutch auction method that allowed more everyday investors to participate. When shares debuted on August 19, 2004, at $85 each, Google was valued at more than $23 billion. Employees who had been paid partly in stock suddenly found themselves holding life-changing wealth. But perhaps more importantly, Google now had the financial firepower to expand at will. And expand they did. The acquisitions came quickly. Keyhole, a mapping startup that would become Google Earth, Picasa, a photo-sharing service. And in 2005, a small mobile operating system company called Android Incorporated. At the time, Android was barely known outside tech circles. In hindsight, it was one of the most consequential purchases in history. Every move seemed to push Google closer to its mission, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. By the mid-2000s, Google had grown from a graduate project into a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar engine of information. Yet behind the glass walls and colorful beanbags, a new question began to form. Could this rocket ship keep climbing forever, or was turbulence ahead? The mid-2000s should have been a period of unbroken victory for Google. The IPO had filled its coffers. Its brand had become a verb. Its market share in search was climbing past 50%, then 60%, then over 70% worldwide. The rainbow-colored logo, simple and inviting, had become the digital doorway through which most people entered the internet. But even at cruising altitude, clouds were gathering. The first rumble came from the very thing that had made Google great, PageRank. As more businesses realized that appearing on the first page of Google results meant visibility, traffic, and profit, a new industry rose up: search engine optimization, SEO. At its best, SEO helped companies make their sites more accessible. At its worst, it became a game of manipulation. Link farms, keyword stuffing, invisible text. Google's once clean results began showing signs of decay. Internally, engineers knew that if relevance slipped, so would trust. In late 2003, Google rolled out its Florida update, a sweeping algorithm change designed to penalize manipulative tactics. It sent shockwaves through the online business world. Some small e-commerce sites saw their traffic vanish overnight. Forums lit up with panic and anger. The message was clear. Google would not allow its results to be gamed without a fight, but the war would be ongoing. Then there was the question of privacy. The very precision that made Google Search, AdWords, and later services like Gmail so powerful depended on collecting and analyzing vast amounts of user data. By 2004, privacy advocates were sounding alarms. The Electronic Frontier Foundation warned of an unprecedented accumulation of personal information in the hands of a single company. When Gmail launched, some critics balked at its practice of scanning email content to serve targeted ads. Google countered that the process was automated and anonymized, but the unease lingered. Beyond privacy, a new breed of competitor was emerging. Not another search engine, but platforms that could siphon user attention in entirely different ways. In 2004, Facebook was born in a Harvard dorm room. By 2006, it had opened to the public. Social networks, not search engines, were becoming the place where users discover content. In 2007, Apple unleashed the iPhone, and with it, the App Store. Suddenly, the mobile internet had an entirely new interface, one that Google did not control. Google responded with ambition. In 2005, it had quietly acquired Android Incorporated, seeing in it a chance to create an open-source alternative to Apple's walled garden. By late 2007, the first Android prototypes were in development. But the move put Google on a collision course with one of its closest partners, Apple. The two companies had once been so friendly that then Google CEO Eric Schmidt sat on Apple's board. When Android launched in 2008, Steve Jobs reportedly felt betrayed. "I'm going to destroy Android because it's a stolen product," Jobs told colleagues. The age of Silicon Valley alliances was over. The age of platform wars had begun. Not all of Google's experiments in this period found traction. Google Wave, 2009, a futuristic mashup of email, instant messaging, and collaborative editing, launched to huge hype and fizzled within a year. Google Buzz, an attempt at a social network embedded in Gmail, ran afoul of privacy complaints almost immediately. Even Google+, launched in 2011 as the company's answer to Facebook, struggled to attract meaningful engagement outside of tech circles. Meanwhile, regulators were circling. In 2010, the European Commission opened a formal investigation into whether Google abused its dominance in search by favoring its own services. Similar antitrust inquiries began in the United States, South Korea, and India. The phrase "don't be evil," once a light-hearted motto, was increasingly invoked, sometimes sarcastically, by critics. Perhaps most challenging was the company's own size. By the early 2010s, Google had tens of thousands of employees spread across the globe. The culture of scrappy experimentation was harder to maintain. Projects ballooned in scope, teams duplicated effort. Larry Page, who reclaimed the CEO role from Schmidt in 2011, lamented in internal meetings that Google was acting like a slow, risk-averse conglomerate instead of the lean disruptor it had been. And yet, through all this, Google remained indispensable. People still Googled everything. But the questions hanging over Mountain View were no longer about whether the technology worked. It was about whether the company could keep innovating, keep its moral compass, and keep the trust of a world increasingly wary of tech giants. From the outside, it looked as if Google had already won. By the mid-2010s, it controlled the world's dominant search engine, the most widely used mobile operating system, and the largest video platform. Chrome had overtaken Internet Explorer and Firefox, becoming the default gateway to the web for over half of all Internet users. Gmail had crossed the billion-user mark. But inside Mountain View, the leadership knew that dominance in tech is never permanent. Complacency is a slow poison. The Chrome Gambit. In 2008, Google had quietly launched Chrome, a minimalist, lightning-fast browser designed to showcase what the modern web could be. Critics saw it as an odd move. Why would Google, already thriving as a search company, pick a fight with entrenched browsers like Internet Explorer and Firefox? But Chrome was never just about browsing. It was a strategic beachhead. The more people used Chrome, the more control Google had over the web experience, and the less it relied on the whims of competitors' platforms. By 2012, Chrome had become the world's most popular browser. It wasn't just software, it was a pipeline, ensuring that Google Search, Gmail, Docs, and Maps were always just one click away. Android's conquest. Meanwhile, Android, acquired for a few $1 million in 2005, became the company's masterstroke. Initially dismissed as an also-ran to Apple's iOS, it gained ground through partnerships with dozens of manufacturers, offering flexibility that Apple's lockdown ecosystem could never match. The 2010 launch of the Nexus 1 marked Google's first foray into building its own branded smartphone. It wasn't a bestseller, but it set the tone for the Android hardware experience. By the mid-2010s, Android was running on over 80% of the world's smartphones. Google wasn't just a search company anymore. It was the invisible operating layer for billions of lives. The YouTube crown. In 2006, when Google paid $1.65 billion for YouTube, critics scoffed, calling it an overpriced platform for cat videos and amateur skits. But YouTube transformed into the largest video repository in human history. By 2015, it was serving billions of hours of content every day, shaping culture, politics, and entertainment in ways no one had foreseen. Music labels, filmmakers, comedians, educators, all found in YouTube a direct connection to their audiences. And behind the scenes, Google's advertising algorithms turned that engagement into a financial juggernaut, facing the backlash. But with size came scrutiny. Governments were no longer simply curious about Google's data practices. They were investigating them. The EU hit Google with multi-billion euro fines for antitrust violations in 2017, 2018, and 2019, alleging abuse of its dominance in search, shopping services, and Android licensing. In the United States, congressional hearings became regular fixtures, with executives grilled over privacy, misinformation, and market power. Public perception began to shift. The motto, "Don't be evil," once printed in the company's code of conduct, was quietly de-emphasized. Journalists and watchdog groups accused Google of abandoning its idealism in favor of shareholder returns. Leaked memos about censored search engines for the Chinese market, Project Dragonfly, fueled outrage among employees and human rights advocates alike. Alphabet and the Pichai era. In 2015, Larry Page and Sergey Brin announced a dramatic restructuring. Google would become a subsidiary of a new holding company, Alphabet Incorporated. This allowed its core internet services to remain under the Google banner, while experimental moonshots, self-driving cars at Waymo, life sciences at Verily, internet balloons at Loon, could operate as separate entities. The move was framed as a way to keep innovation alive without bogging down the search and advertising machine. Sundar Pichai, a soft-spoken but formidable product leader who had spearheaded Chrome and overseen Android, was appointed CEO of Google. Pichai's leadership style contrasted with Page and Brin's iconoclasm. He was a diplomat in an era when Google needed exactly that. In 2019, Page and Brin stepped back from day-to-day roles, making Pichai CEO of both Google and Alphabet. The AI pivot. The late 2010s and early 2020s marked another shift. Artificial intelligence was no longer a lab curiosity. It was the future. Google's 2014 acquisition of DeepMind and its development of TensorFlow, an open-source machine learning platform, gave it a head start. In 2018, Google unveiled BERT, a natural language processing model that improved search understanding dramatically. By the early 2020s, AI was infused into everything. Autocomplete in Gmail, predictive routing in Google Maps, real-time translation in Google Translate, and conversational search that felt almost human. But AI brought new ethical challenges, bias in algorithms, the risk of disinformation at scale, and the fear that automation could displace millions of jobs. Google's own AI ethics team saw high-profile departures amid internal controversies, raising questions about whether the company could lead responsibly in this domain. Weathering the storm. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 accelerated digital reliance, and Google's services became lifelines for work, school, and connection. Yet the same period intensified calls for antitrust action. In 2023 and 2024, lawsuits in the U.S. accused Google of monopolistic control over digital advertising. Fines, compliance orders, and mandated changes to business practices became regular headlines. And still, the machine kept running. Billions searched, billions watched, billions tapped their Android screens. Google wasn't the same idealistic startup from the Stanford garage, but it had adapted, survived, and in some areas like AI and cloud computing, it was leading the next phase of the digital revolution. By 2025, Google's triumph was not in avoiding conflict, but in navigating it. The empire had been tested by competitors, by governments, by its own internal contradictions, and emerged transformed. Leaner in some ways, more guarded in others, but still, undeniably, one of the central nervous systems of the modern world. Walk down any city street in the 2020s, and Google's presence is invisible yet everywhere. A teenager checks Google Maps to find a cafe where friends are waiting. A parent uses Google Translate to read a prescription in another language. A small business owner studies analytics to see how customers are finding their shop online. Somewhere, millions of times a second, someone somewhere Googles something, from the trivial to the life-changing. That ubiquity is the truest measure of Google's legacy. It has become the default interface for human curiosity. A language changed. It's rare for a brand name to slip into the lexicon as a verb, rarer still for it to do so globally. Yet, to Google is understood from Nairobi to New Delhi, from Stockholm to Sao Paulo. The phrase isn't just shorthand for searching online. It's shorthand for finding an answer instantly. That cultural leap, from a time when information required hours in a library to an era when it's a few keystrokes away, is one of the most significant shifts in modern human history. A new architecture of knowledge. Before Google, search engines were like messy filing cabinets. After Google, they became dynamic, self-updating libraries that could predict what you were looking for before you even finished typing. The PageRank algorithm, though just one component of modern search, rewired the way technologists think about networks. Value is not just in content itself, but in how that content is connected. That insight has rippled into fields from social media to scientific research. Democratization of tools. Gmail's free gigabyte of storage in 2004 set a new standard for generosity in online services. Google Docs and Sheets eroded the monopoly of paid office software, enabling students and startups to collaborate in real time without paying a cent. Android put smartphones, and by extension, the internet, into billions of hands, often in regions where iPhones were prohibitively expensive. In this way, Google's platforms became digital infrastructure, particularly in the global South. A catalyst for entire industries. The rise of search engine optimization, online advertising, influencer marketing, all have roots in the ecosystems Google built. YouTube didn't just host videos. It created careers, birthed new genres, and gave marginalized voices a global stage. Google Maps didn't just replace paper maps. It became the foundation for ride-sharing, food delivery, and logistics industries. The ripple effect is so vast that it's almost impossible to untangle. The double-edged sword. Yet this legacy is complicated. The same search algorithms that surface vital health information can also amplify conspiracy theories. YouTube's recommendation system can educate, entertain, or spiral users into echo chambers. The concentration of so much digital power in a single company raises perennial questions. Who decides what information is visible? Whose voices are amplified or buried? How much should a private corporation know about the lives of billions? Privacy debates are no longer fringe concerns. They're central to discussions about digital rights in the 21st century. Data protection laws like the EU's GDPR were shaped, in part, by the very capabilities and controversies of companies like Google. Antitrust battles continue to probe whether Google's dominance stifles competition or simply reflects user choice. A lesson in adaptation. From a Stanford dorm room to a global corporation, Google's journey illustrates a truth about technology. Success is not just about invention, but reinvention. It survived the dot-com crash, the platform wars, the shift to mobile, and the rise of AI, each time adjusting course without losing its core identity as a search and information company. Few tech giants have managed that kind of sustained relevance over a quarter century. A story still being written. In 2025, Google stands at the center of another technological pivot, the integration of AI into everyday life. Its tools are no longer just about retrieving information, but understanding context, predicting needs, and even generating new content. This raises fresh ethical challenges, but also opportunities to redefine what search means in a post-keyword world. Larry Page once described Google's ultimate goal as building the perfect search engine that understands exactly what you mean and gives you back exactly what you want. That ambition remains as bold and as fraught as it was in the 1990s. Whether Google achieves it and whether the world will like the result may define its next chapter. From a cluttered dorm room at Stanford to the humming data centers that now span continents, Google's story is both a blueprint and a cautionary tale. It is proof that the smallest sparks, a question, an algorithm, a garage full of scavenged servers, can ignite revolutions. But it is also a reminder that the same forces that connect the world can reshape it in ways no founder can fully control. And so, every time we type into that blank search box, we're not just asking Google a question. We're participating in an ongoing experiment, one that has been running for over a quarter of a century and is far from over.